Okay, back to it. We're going to see if we can't put in another 1.25 today. Let's see where we get.
Isaac Newton, before Galileo, we were shrouded with the mysteries of superstition. People believed in all sorts of different kinds of spirits and demons. What made the planets move? Why do things interact with other things? It was a mystery. So back in the Middle Ages, for example, people read the works of Aristotle. And Aristotle asked the question, why do objects move toward the earth? And that's because, he said, objects yearn to be united with the earth. And why do objects slow down when you put them in motion? Objects in motion slow down because they get tired. These are the works of Aristotle, which held sway for almost 2,000 years until the beginning of modern physics with Galileo and Isaac Newton. When the ancients looked at the sky was full of mystery and wonder. And in the year 1066, the most important date on the British calendar, there was a comet which sailed over the battlefield of Hastings. It frightened the troops of King Harold, and a young man from Normandy swept into England and defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, creating the modern British monarchy. But the question is, where did the comet come from? What was this comet that mysteriously paved the way for the coming of the British monarchy? Well, believe it or not, that same comet.
Hey, buddy. How you doing? What's going on? Where you at, my buddy? Yeah. You've been coming in here a lot recently. What's that about? What's that about? You want to lay by my feet? You can lay down there if you want. Weirdo. What a weirdo you are.
The very same comet that initiated the British monarchy sailed over London once again in 1682. This time, everyone was asking the question, where do comets come from? Do they signal the death of the king? Why do we have messengers from the heavens in the sky? Well, one man dared to penetrate the secrets of comets, and that was Isaac Newton. In fact, when Isaac Newton was only 23 years old, he stumbled upon the universal force of gravitation. According to one story, he was walking on his estate in Woolsthorpe, and he saw an apple fall. And then Isaac Newton saw the moon. And then he asked the key question which helped to unlock the heavens. If apples fall, does the moon also fall? And the answer was yes. And that answer overturned thousands of years of mystery and speculation about the motions of the heavens. The moon is in free fall. Just like an apple, the moon is constantly falling toward the earth. It doesn't hit the earth because it spins around the earth and the earth is round, but it's acting under a force of gravity. So Newton immediately tried to work out the mathematics, and he realized that the mathematics of the 1600s was not sufficient to work out the motion of a falling moon. So what did Isaac Newton do? When he was 23 years old, not only did he stumble upon the force of gravity, but he also created calculus. In fact, he created calculus at the rate at which you learn it when you're a freshman in college. And why did he create calculus? To calculate the motion of a falling moon. The mathematics of his age was incapable of calculating the trajectories of objects moving under an inverse square force field. And that's what Isaac Newton did. He worked out the motion of the moon. And then he realized that if he understands the moon, he also understands the motion of the planets in the solar system. And Isaac Newton invented a new telescope. It was the reflecting telescope, and he was tracking the motion of this comet. Well, it turns out that everyone was talking about the comet, including a rather wealthy Englishman by the name of Edmund Halley. So Edmund Halley, being a wealthy merchant, decided to make a trip to Cambridge to talk to England's illustrious scientist, Sir Isaac Newton. Well, Edmund Halley asked Newton, "What do you make of this comet?" No one understands comets. They're a mystery. They've been fascinating people for centuries, for millennia. What are your thoughts? And then I paraphrase, but Isaac Newton said something like this. He said, "Oh, that's easy. That comet is moving in a perfect ellipse. It's moving in an inverse square force field. I've been tracking it every day with my reflecting telescope, and the path of that comet conforms to my mathematics exactly." And of course, we don't know what Edmund Halley's reaction was, but I paraphrase. He must have said something like this: "For God's sake, man, why don't you publish the greatest work in all of scientific history? If correct, you have decoded the secret of the stars, the secret of the heavens. Nobody understands where comets come from." And then Newton responded and said, "Oh, well, it costs too much. I mean, I'm not a wealthy man. It would cost too much to summarize this calculus that I've invented and to work out all the motion of the stars." And then Halley must have said this: "Mr. Newton, I am a wealthy man. I have made my fortune in commerce. I will pay for the publication of the greatest scientific work in any language." And it was Principia. The principles, the mathematical principles that guide the heavens. Believe it or not, this is perhaps one of the most important works ever written by a human being in the 100,000 years since we evolved from Africa. Realize that this book sets into motion a physics of the universe. Forces that control the motion of the planets. Forces which can be calculated. Forces which govern the motion of cannonballs, rockets, pebbles. Everything that moves according to the laws of motion and the calculus of Sir Isaac Newton. In fact, even today, when we launch our space probes, we don't use Einstein's equations. They only apply when you get near the speed of light or near a black hole. We use Newton's laws of gravity. They are so precise that when we shoot a space probe right past the rings of Saturn, we use exactly the same equations that Isaac Newton unraveled in the 1600s. That's why we've been able to unravel the secrets of the solar system, complements of the laws of motion of Isaac Newton. So what Newton did was not only did he set into motion the ability to calculate planets, he also set into motion a mechanics. Machines now operated upon well-defined laws. Newton's 3 laws of motion. The first law of motion says that objects in motion stay in motion forever unless acted on by an outside force. You see that in an ice skating rink. You shoot a puck and it goes all the way down forever unless acted on by an outside force. That's different from Aristotle's law of motion. Aristotle said objects in motion eventually stop because they get tired. The second law of motion says force is mass times acceleration, and that equation made possible the Industrial Revolution. Steam engines, locomotives, factories, machines, all of it due to the mechanics set into motion by Isaac Newton's second law of motion, force is equal to mass times acceleration. And then Newton had a third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's the law of rockets. That's why we have rockets that can sail into outer space. So the lesson here is, when scientists unraveled the first force of the universe, gravity, that set into motion the Industrial Revolution. A revolution which toppled the kings and queens of Europe, which displaced feudalism, ushering in the modern age, all because a 23-year-old gentleman looked up and asked the question, does the moon also fall? You know, when I was a kid growing up in California, I would see pictures of the Empire State Building. And I said to myself, how could they possibly build such a big building and not know that it's going to fall? Why doesn't it fall? They didn't build scale models of the thing. You couldn't have an Empire State Building that big to test whether it's going to fall or not. How did they know ahead of time that that building wouldn't fall? And the answer is Newton's laws of motion. In fact, today I teach Newton's laws of motion, and you can actually calculate the forces on every single brick of the Empire State Building using Newton's second law of motion, force is mass times acceleration. When Newton unraveled the force of gravity, that was the first force. Now let's take a look at the second force, an even greater force, which has touched all of our lives, and that is the electromagnetic force. Ever since humans saw lightning bolts light up the sky, ever since they were terrified by the sound of thunder, they've been asking, do the gods propel lightning bolts and create thunder? Are they angry at us? Scientists begin to realize that the lightning bolts and the thunder can be duplicated on the Earth, that we can actually create mini lightning bolts using electricity. But it wasn't until the 1800s that finally we began to unlock the second great force which rules the universe, the electromagnetic force. Michael Faraday would give Christmas lectures in London, fascinating everyone from adults to children. And he would demonstrate the incredible properties of electricity. Some people, for example, ask a simple question. If you're in a car or an airplane, you get hit by a lightning bolt, why don't you all get electrocuted and why don't you all die? Well, Faraday answered the question. He would create a cage. He would walk into this steel cage, electrify it, and he wouldn't get electrocuted at all. That's called the Faraday cage. And every time you walk into a metal structure, you get shielded by this metal object. But what Michael Faraday did was he helped to unleash the second great revolution with something called Faraday's law. A moving wire in a magnetic field has its electrons pushed, creating an electrical current. That simple idea unleashed the electric revolution. And that's why we have hydroelectric generators, dams that can produce enormous amounts of power. That's why people build nuclear power plants. That's why we have electricity in this room right now. On a very small scale, you use that in your bicycle. When you put a bicycle lamp on your bicycle, the turning of the wheel spins a magnet. The magnet then pushes electrons in a wire, and that's why electricity lights up in your bicycle lamp. So in other words, electricity and magnetism were unified into a single force. We once thought that electricity and magnetism were separate. Now we know they are, in fact, the same force. So if a moving magnet can create an electric field, this means that a moving electric field can create a magnetic field. But if they can create each other, why can't they oscillate and create a wave? So that moving electric fields create magnetic fields, create electric fields, create magnetic fields, infinitum, to create a wave. Well, around the time of the American Civil War, a mathematical physicist, James Clerk Maxwell, calculated, using the work of Faraday, the velocity of this wave. And one of the greatest breakthroughs of all time, James Clerk Maxwell calculated the velocity of this wave and found out it was the velocity of light. And then he made this incredible discovery. This is light. That's what light is. It doesn't by accident travel at the speed of electricity. It is light itself. And the equations were written down by James Clerk Maxwell. Unfortunately, Michael Faraday himself did not have a formal education. He could not put into mathematical form his own work. James Clerk Maxwell was a theoretical physicist, just like myself. He wrote down the mathematical physics of oscillating electric fields and magnetic fields, and they are called Maxwell's equations. These equations have to be memorized by every physicist in grad school. You cannot get your PhD without memorizing these equations. Every engineer who deals with radar and radio has to memorize these equations. And so, if you go to Berkeley, where I got my PhD, you can buy a t-shirt which says, "In the beginning, God said, the four-dimensional divergence of an antisymmetric second-rank tensor equals 0, and there was light." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the equation for light. The consequences of if you go to Berkeley, where I got my PhD, you can buy a t-shirt which says, "In the beginning, God said, the four-dimensional divergence of an antisymmetric second-rank tensor equals 0, and there was light." Ladies and gentlemen, this is the equation for light. The consequences of the electromagnetic revolution touch all of us. This is a picture of the Earth from outer space. Look at this picture. Europe, electrified. You can actually see the fruits of all of our efforts to create electricity, to energize our lives in one picture, seeing the Earth from outer space. So let's now talk about how Faraday and Maxwell's work touches your life as well. This is the internet. The internet is a simple byproduct of the electromagnetic force. And you can see that where there is the internet, there's prosperity. There is science. There's entertainment. There's economic activity. Where there's no internet, there's poverty. And in the future, the internet will be miniaturized and it'll be placed in your glasses. Your glasses will recognize people's faces and display their biography next to the image as you talk to them. And then when they speak Chinese to you, your glasses will translate Chinese into English and print out subtitles right beneath their image. So in the future, you will know exactly who you are talking to without even talking to them. And this means that at a cocktail party, if you're looking for a job, but you don't know who the heavy hitters are, in the future, you will know exactly who to suck up to. In the future, chips will only cost a penny, because we can manufacture tinier and tinier transistors. You will have Faraday's electromagnetic force inside your body. This is a pill. It has a chip in it. The chip is smaller than an aspirin pill. It also has a TV camera and a magnet. When you swallow it, the magnet guides the camera, taking pictures of your stomach, your intestines, because we all know what middle-aged men fear the most, colonoscopies. And this is new meaning for the expression Intel inside. Now, let's talk about the next great forces which rule the universe. We talked about gravity, which allows us to calculate the motion of the planets. The mechanics created by Newton helped to unleash the Industrial Revolution. Michael Faraday worked out the electromagnetic force, which gave us the wonders of the electric age. And now let's talk about the nuclear age, the stars and the sun. People have been fascinated by the sun. Apollo was the god that strode across the heavens in his fiery chariot. But hey, when you calculate how long coal or oil will burn like the sun, you realize that in just a few hundred years, the sun would burn to a crisp. So what could possibly last for billions of years? There must be a new force, a nuclear force. Einstein and others helped to unravel the secret of the stars. The nuclear force comes in two types, weak and strong. The weak nuclear force governs radioactive decay. The strong nuclear force is one of the strongest forces in the entire universe. It's so strong, it holds our protons together ever since Genesis, the beginning of time. The equation which allows for the liberation of energy is Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. What Einstein showed was that the faster you move, the heavier you get. So your weight is not a constant. When you move very rapidly, you get heavier, something which we measure every day in the laboratory. Now, this means that the energy of motion transformed into mass because you get heavier. Now, listen carefully. The faster you move, the heavier you get, which means the energy of motion, E, turns into m, your mass. And the relationship between E and m is very simple. It takes 1 second to write it down on a sheet of paper. It is exactly E equals mc squared. So the nuclear force helped to explain the secret of the sun, but it also created a Pandora's box. Because inside the nucleus of the atom are particles. And when you smash these particles, what do you get? More particles. And when you smash them, what do you get? More particles. In fact, we are drowning in subatomic particles. Hundreds, thousands of subatomic particles every time we smash atoms. Now, we smash atoms using something called atom smashers or particle accelerators. I built my own particle accelerator when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I went to my mom one day, and I said, Mom, can I have permission to build a 2.3 million electron volt betatron particle accelerator in the garage? And my mom said, sure, why not? And don't forget to take out the garbage. So I went to Westinghouse, and as a high school kid, I asked for 400 pounds of transformer steel. I asked for 22 miles of copper wire, because I wanted to create a 6 kilowatt, 10,000 Gauss magnetic field to energize my atom smasher. With 22 miles of copper wire, how could you wind it? We did it on the high school football field. I put 22 miles of copper wire on the goalpost, gave it to my mother. She ran to the 50-yard line, unraveling the spool of wire. She gave it to my father, who then ran to the goalpost, and we wound 22 miles of copper wire on the high school football field. Well, finally, my atom smasher was ready. It consumed 6 kilowatts of power. That's every single ounce of power that my house could deliver. I plugged my ears, I closed my eyes, I turned on the power, and I heard this huge crackling sound as 6 kilowatts of power surged through my capacitor bank. And then I heard a pop, pop, pop sound as I blew out every single circuit breaker in the house. The whole house was plunged in darkness. My poor mom, every time she'd come home, she would see the lights flicker and die. And she must have wondered, why couldn't I have a son who plays baseball? Why can't he learn basketball? And for God's sake, why can't he find a nice Japanese girl? I mean, why does he have to build these machines in the garage? Well, these machines that I built in my garage earned the attention of a physicist, Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb. And he arranged for me to get a scholarship to Harvard. And my career got a head start. He knew exactly what I was doing. I didn't have to explain to him that I was experimenting with antimatter. I was creating anti-electrons in my mom's garage and using atom smashers to eventually create beams of antimatter. Antimatter is the opposite of matter. It has the opposite charge. So an electron has negative charge. The positron or anti-electron has positive charge. This means that you can now create anti-molecules and anti-atoms. Anti-hydrogen was made at CERN outside Geneva, Switzerland, and also at Fermilab outside Chicago, where I have anti-electrons circulating around anti-protons. And in Brookhaven National Laboratory in Long Island, just recently, they detected anti-helium. We have 2 anti-protons with 2 anti-neutrons to create anti-helium. For every piece of matter, there's a counterpart which is made out of antimatter. And when the two collide, by the way, it releases the greatest energy source in the universe. It is 100% conversion of matter to energy by Einstein's equations, E equals mc squared. Inside the nucleus of the atom, we have particles upon particles when you smash them apart. In the 1950s, we were drowning in subatomic particles. In fact, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, once made a statement. He declared that the Nobel Prize in physics should go to the physicist who does not discover a new particle this year. That's how many particles were being discovered. So let's talk about the particle zoo. Right now, we physicists have unlocked hundreds, thousands of subatomic particles, and we've been able to piece them together into a jigsaw puzzle. It's called the Standard Model. It has 36 quarks, 19 free parameters, 3 generations of quarks, no rhyme, no reason, but this is the most fundamental basis of reality that we physicists have been able to construct. Billions of dollars, 20 Nobel Prizes have gone into the creation of the Standard Model, and it is the ugliest theory known to science, but it works. There's one piece missing, and that one piece that's missing is called the Higgs boson. We expect to find it. We want to create a higher version of this theory. And that theory, we think, is string theory. String theory is based on the simple idea that all the 4 forces of the universe, gravity, the electromagnetic force, and the 2 nuclear forces, can be viewed as music. Music of tiny little rubber bands. So if I had a super microscope and I could look right into the heart of an electron, what would I see? I would see a vibrating rubber band. And if I twang it, it turns into a neutrino. I twang it again, it turns into a quark. I twang it again, it turns into a Yang-Mills particle. In fact, if I twang it enough times, I get thousands of subatomic particles that have been cataloged patiently by physicists. String theory, we think, is a theory of everything. Now, string theory, in turn, can be summarized in an equation about an inch long. That's my equation. This is called string field theory. And how will we test it? We are building a machine, the biggest machine of science ever built in the history of the human race, outside Geneva, Switzerland. It is the Large Hadron Collider. So the Higgs boson, we think, will be created by the Large Hadron Collider. A tube 17 miles in circumference with 2 beams of protons circulating in opposite directions, then slamming together, creating a shower of particles. And among these particles, we hope to find the Higgs boson. But not only that, we hope to find particles even beyond the Higgs boson. The next set of particles beyond the Higgs boson are sparticles. The next layer of the jigsaw puzzle are called sparticles, superparticles, nothing but higher vibrations, higher musical notes of a vibrating string. And what else can we do? We can also unlock the secrets of the Big Bang. You see, Einstein's equations break down at the instant of the Big Bang and the center of a black hole. The 2 most interesting places in the universe are beyond our reach using Einstein's equations. We need a higher theory, and that's where string theory comes in. String theory takes you before the Big Bang, before Genesis itself. And what does string theory say? It says that there is a multiverse of universes. Where did the Big Bang come from? Well, Einstein's equations give us this compelling picture that we are like insects on a soap bubble, a gigantic soap bubble which is expanding, and we are trapped like flies on flypaper. We can't escape the soap bubble, and that's called the Big Bang theory. String theory says there should be other bubbles out there in a multiverse of bubbles. When 2 universes collide, it can form another universe. When a universe splits in half, it can create 2 universes, and that, we think, is the Big Bang. The Big Bang is caused either by the collision of universes or by the fissioning of universes. If there are other dimensions, if there are other universes, can we go between universes? Well, that, of course, is very hard. However, Alice in Wonderland gives us a possibility that maybe one day we might create a wormhole between universes. This is a wormhole. Think of taking a sheet of paper and putting two dots on it. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But if I can fold that sheet of paper, then perhaps I can create a shortcut through space and time, called a wormhole. This is a genuine solution of Einstein's equations. We can actually see this in string theory. The question is, how practical is it to go through one of these things? We don't know. In fact, there's a debate among physicists today. Stephen Hawking, many physicists are jumping into the game of trying to figure out whether it is physically possible to go all the way through a wormhole. Because if you could, then you might be able to use this as a time machine. Since string theory is a theory of everything, it's also a theory of time. And time machines are allowed in Einstein's equations, but to build one is extremely difficult. Far more energy is required than a simple DeLorean with plutonium. You know, trillions of years from now, the universe is going to get awfully cold. We think the universe is headed for a big freeze. All the stars will blink out. Stars will cease to twinkle. The universe will be so big, it'll be very cold. At that point, all intelligent life in the universe must die. The laws of physics are a death warrant to all intelligent life. There's only one way to escape the death of the universe, and that is leave the universe. We are now, of course, entering the realm of science fiction, but at least we now have equations, the equations of string theory, which will allow us to calculate if it is possible to go through a wormhole, to go to another universe where it's warmer, and perhaps we can start all over again. If you were to summarize the march of physics over the last 10,000 years, it would be the distillation of the laws of nature into 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electricity, and magnetism, and the 2 nuclear forces. But then the question is there a 5th force? A force beyond the forces that we can measure in the laboratory. And believe it or not, there are physicists who've actually looked very carefully for a 5th force. Some people think maybe it's psychic phenomena. Maybe it's telepathy. Maybe it's something called psi power. Maybe it's the power of the mind. Maybe consciousness. Well, I'm a physicist. We believe in testing theories to make sure that they are falsifiable and reproducible. We want to make sure that on demand, your theory works every single time without exception. And if your theory fails one time, it's wrong. In other words, Einstein's theory has to work every single time without exception. One time, Einstein's theory is proven to be wrong, the whole theory is wrong. Well, so far, we can reproduce these 4 physical theories, but a 5th theory cannot be reproduced. We've looked for it. Some people think that maybe a 5th force may be short range, like not over the nucleus of the atom, but ranging over several feet. And we can't find any. We physicists in the last 10 years have discovered a new energy source larger than the galaxy itself. Dark energy. Realize that in our universe today, 73% of our universe, the matter and energy, 73% is in the form of dark energy, the energy of nothing. That's what's blowing the galaxies farther and farther apart. That's the energy of the Big Bang itself. Kids ask the question, if the universe banged, then what made it bang? And the answer is dark energy. 73% of the universe's energy is dark energy. 23% is dark matter. Dark matter is invisible matter. If I held it in my hand, it would go right through my hand. It holds the galaxy together. 23% of the universe is dark matter. Stars made out of hydrogen and helium make up 4% of the universe. And then what about us? We, the higher elements. We made out of oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, tungsten, iron. We make up 0.03% of the universe. In other words, we are the exception. The universe is mainly made out of dark energy. The universe is mainly made out of dark matter, overwhelming the stars, overwhelming the galaxies, in fact. And what is dark matter, which makes up 23% of the universe? No one knows. String theory gives us a clue, but there's no definitive answer. So in other words, for you young aspiring physicists out there in the audience, you may be saying to yourself right now, why should I go into physics? Because you guys already have a candidate for the unified field theory, right? Just realize that every single physics textbook is wrong. Every single physics textbook on the earth says that the universe is mainly made out of atoms, right? There it is. The universe is mainly made out of atoms. Wrong. In the last 10 years, we have come to the realization that most of the universe is dark. And there's a whole shelf full of Nobel Prizes for the young people who can figure out the secret of dark matter and dark energy. Let me give some advice to you. If you are a young physicist, perhaps just getting out of high school, you have dreams of being Einstein, of dreams of working on string theory and stuff like that. And then you hit freshman physics. Let me be blunt. We physicists flunk most students taking elementary physics, and we're more or less encouraged to do so by the engineering department. We don't want to train engineers who make bridges that fall down. We don't want to create engineers that create skyscrapers that fall over. There's a bottom line. You have to know the laws of mechanics. So before you can work with the laws of Einstein, you have to work with the laws of friction, levers, pulleys, and gears. As a consequence, we have a very high flunk-out rate in elementary physics. So if you're a young physicist graduating from high school with stars in your eyes, and you encounter freshman physics for the first time, watch out. If you have a rough time, that's the way it is. I started out my life as an experimental physicist. Then I went to Harvard, and then I talked to my advisor, one of the world's greatest experimental physicists, Professor Pound, and he told me that maybe it's time to give it a rest. He said to me, your skills are much better suited to what you love the most, which is theory, mathematics, the world of higher dimensions. And I realized that he was probably right. The thing about physics, or even science, that really intrigues me the most is to find the most fundamental basis for everything. Rather than trying to massage a theory or make a theory prettier, why not find out why it works? What makes it tick? And that's what I do for a living. I'm a theoretical physicist. Thank you very much. And then I talked to my advisor, one of the world's greatest experimental physicists, Professor Pound, and he told me that maybe it's time to give it a rest. He said to me, your skills are much better suited to what you love the most, which is theory, mathematics, the world of higher dimensions. And I realized that he was probably right. The thing about physics, or even science, that really intrigues me the most is to find the most fundamental basis for everything. Rather than trying to massage a theory or make a theory prettier, why not find out why it works? What makes it tick? And that's what I do for a living. I'm a theoretical physicist. Thank you very much.
Pretty cool.
Many physicists had a heart attack. Elementary physics.
It's a good day to be a pirate. Amaro and his four mateys, Art, Charlotte, Daniel, and Eliza, have struck gold, a chest with 100 coins. But now they must divvy up the booty according to the pirate code. As captain, Amaro gets to propose how to distribute the coins. Then each pirate, including Amaro himself, gets to vote either yar or nay. If the vote passes, or if there's a tie, the coins are divided according to plan. But if the majority votes nay, Amaro must walk the plank, and Bart becomes captain. Then Bart gets to propose a new distribution, and all remaining pirates vote again. If his plan is rejected, he walks the plank too, and Charlotte takes his place. This process repeats, with the captain's hat moving to Daniel and then Eliza until either a proposal is accepted or there's only one pirate left. Naturally, each pirate wants to stay alive while getting as much gold as possible. But being pirates, none of them trust each other, so they can't collaborate in advance. And being bloodthirsty pirates, if anyone thinks they'll end up with the same amount of gold either way, they'll vote to make the captain walk the plank, just for fun. Finally, each pirate is excellent at logical deduction, and knows that the others are too. What distribution should Amaro propose to make sure he lives?
I guess one that doesn't favor him.
If we follow our intuition, it seems like Amaro should try to bribe the other pirates with most of the gold to increase the chances of his plan being accepted. But it turns out he can do much better than that. Why? Like we said, the pirates all know each other to be top-notch logicians. So when each votes, they won't just be thinking about the current proposal, but about all possible outcomes down the line. And because the rank order is known in advance, each can accurately predict how the others would vote in any situation and adjust their own votes accordingly. Because Eliza's last, she has the most outcomes to consider. So let's start by following her thought process. She reasoned this out by working backwards from the last possible scenario, with only her and Daniel remaining. Daniel would obviously propose to keep all the gold, and Eliza's one vote would not be enough to override him, so Eliza wants to avoid this situation at all costs. Now we move to the previous decision point, with 3 pirates left and Charlotte making the proposal. Everyone knows that if she's outvoted, the decision moves to Daniel, who will then get all the gold while Eliza gets nothing. So to secure Eliza's vote, Charlotte only needs to offer her slightly more than nothing, 1 coin. Since this ensures her support, Charlotte doesn't need to offer Daniel anything at all. What if there are 4 pirates? As captain, Bart would still only need 1 other vote for his plan to pass. He knows that Daniel wouldn't want the decision to pass to Charlotte, so he would offer Daniel 1
Oh my
coin
god, this is
for
kind of boring, huh?
Imagine an island where 100 people, all perfect logicians, are imprisoned by a mad dictator. There's no escape, except for one strange rule. Any prisoner can approach the guards at night and ask to leave. If they have green eyes, they'll be released. If not, they'll be tossed into the volcano. As it happens, all 100 prisoners have green eyes, but they've lived there since birth, and the dictator has ensured they can't learn their own eye color. There are no reflective surfaces. All water is in opaque containers, and most importantly, they're not allowed to communicate among themselves, though they do see each other during each morning's head count. Nevertheless, they all know no one would ever risk trying to leave without absolute certainty of success. After much pressure from human rights groups, the dictator reluctantly agrees to let you visit the island and speak to the prisoners under the following conditions. You may only make 1 statement, and you cannot tell them any new information. What can you say to help free the prisoners without incurring the dictator's wrath? After thinking long and hard, you tell the crowd, at least one of you has green eyes. The dictator is suspicious but reassures himself that your statement couldn't have changed anything. You leave, and life on the island seems to go on as before. But on the 100th morning after your visit, all the prisoners are gone, each having asked to leave the previous night. So how did you outsmart the dictator? It might help to realize that the amount of prisoners is arbitrary. Let's simplify things by imagining just two, Adria and Bill. Each sees one person with green eyes, and for all they know, that could be the only one. For the first night, each stays put. But when they see each other still there in the morning, they gain new information. Adria realizes that if Bill had seen a non-green-eyed person next to him, he would have left the first night, after concluding the statement could only refer to himself. Bill simultaneously realizes the same thing about Adria. The fact that the other person waited tells each prisoner his or her own eyes must be green. And on the second morning, they're both gone. Now imagine a third prisoner. Adria, Bill, and Carl each see two green-eyed people, but aren't sure if each of the others is also seeing two green-eyed people, or just one. They wait out the first night as before, but the next morning they still can't be sure. Carl thinks, if I have non-green eyes, Adria and Bill were just watching each other, and will now both leave on the second night. But when he sees both of them the third morning, he realizes they must have been watching him too. Adria and Bill have each been going through.
I was trying to think, what did I say that could actually be helpful or useful to you in the future? And I thought perhaps tell the story of how I sort of came to be here. How did some of these things happen? And maybe there's some lessons there, because I often find myself wondering, how did this happen? So when I was young, I didn't really know what I was going to do when I got older. People kept asking me, and eventually I thought that the idea of inventing things would be really cool. And the reason I thought that was because I read a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which said that sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's really true. If you go back, say, 300 years, the things that we take for granted today, you'd be burned at the stake for. You know, being able to fly, that's crazy. Being able to see over long distances, being able to communicate, having effectively, with the internet, a group mind of sorts, and having access to all the world's information instantly from almost anywhere on the earth. This is stuff that really would be magic, or would be considered magic in times past. In fact, I think it actually goes beyond that, because there are many things that we take for granted today that weren't even imagined in times past. They weren't even in the realm of magic. So that it actually goes beyond that. So I thought, well, you know, if I can do some of those things, basically if I can advance technology, then that's like magic, and that would be really cool. And I also had sort of a slight existential crisis, because I was trying to figure out what does it all mean? Like, what's the purpose of things? And I came to the conclusion that if we can advance the knowledge of the world, if we can do things that expand the scope and scale of consciousness, then we're better able to ask the right questions and become more enlightened. And that's really the only way forward. So I studied physics and business, because I figured in order to do a lot of these things, you need to know how the universe works, and you need to know how the economy works. And you also need to be able to bring a lot of people together to work with you to create something, because it's very difficult to do something as an individual if it's significant technology. So I originally came out to California to try to figure out how to improve the energy density of electric vehicles, basically to try to figure out if there was an advanced capacitor that could serve as an alternative to batteries. That was in '95, and that's also when the internet started to happen. And I thought, well, I can either to batteries. That was in '95. I figured out if there was an advanced capacitor that could serve as an alternative to batteries. That was in '95, and that's also when the internet started to happen. And I thought, well, I can either pursue this technology where success maybe may not be one of the possible outcomes, which is always tricky, or participate in the internet and be part of it. So I decided to drop out. Did some internet stuff. Did a few things here and there. One of which was PayPal. And I think maybe it's helpful to say one of the things that was important then in the creation of PayPal was kind of how it started, because the initial thought was with PayPal was to create an agglomeration of financial services. So you have one place where all of your financial services needs would be seamlessly integrated and work smoothly. And then we had like a little feature which was to do email payments. And whenever we show the system off to someone, we'd show the hard part, which was the agglomeration of financial services, which was quite difficult to put together. Nobody was interested. Then we'd show people email payments, which was actually quite easy, and everybody was interested. So this is, I think it's important to take feedback from your environment. You want to be as closed loop as possible. So we focused on email payments and really try to make that work, and that's what really got things to take off. But if we hadn't responded to what people said, then we probably would not have been successful. So it's important to look for things like that and focus on them when you see them, and you correct your prior assumptions. And then going from PayPal, I thought, well, what are some of the other problems that are likely to most affect the future of humanity? It really wasn't from the perspective of what's the rank-ordered best way to make money, which is okay, but it was really what I think is going to most affect the future of humanity. So I think the biggest terrestrial problem we've got is sustainable energy, both production and consumption of energy in a sustainable manner. If we don't solve that this century, we're in deep trouble. And then the other one being the extension of life beyond Earth to make life multiplanetary. So the latter is the basis for SpaceX, and the former is the basis for Tesla and Solar City. And when I started SpaceX, initially I thought that, well, there's no way one could possibly start a rocket company. I wasn't that crazy. I thought, well, what is a way to increase NASA's budget? That was actually my initial goal. So I thought, well, if we could do a low-cost mission to Mars, something called Mars Oasis, which would land seeds in dehydrated nutrient gel, and you hydrate them upon landing, and then you'd have this great sort of money shot of green plants on a red background. The public tends to respond to precedents and superlatives, and this would be the first life on Mars, the furthest that life's ever traveled, as far as we know. And I thought, well, that would get people really excited, and therefore increase NASA's budget. So obviously, the financial outcome from such a mission would probably be zero. So anything better than that was on the upside. So I actually went to Russia 3 times to look at buying a refurbished ICBM, because that was the best deal. And I can tell you it was very weird going there in 2000, late 2001, 2002, going to the Russian rocket forces and saying, I'd like to buy 2 of your biggest rockets, but you can keep the nuke. That's a lot more. They thought I was crazy, but I did have money, so that was okay. After making several trips to Russia, I came to the conclusion that actually my initial impression was wrong, because my initial thought was, well, that there's not enough will to explore and expand beyond Earth and have a Mars base and that kind of thing. But I came to the conclusion that that was wrong. In fact, there's plenty of will, particularly in the United States, because the United States is a nation of explorers, of people who came here from other parts of the world. I think the United States is really a distillation of the spirit of human exploration. But if people think it's impossible or it's going to completely break the federal budget, then they're not going to do it. So after my third trip, I said, okay, well, what we really need to do here is try to solve the space transport problem, and started SpaceX. And this was against the advice of pretty much everyone I talked to. My one friend made me sit down and watch a bunch of videos of rockets blowing up. Let me tell you, he wasn't far wrong. It was tough going there at the beginning because I'd never built anything physical. I mean, I built like little model rockets as a kid and that kind of thing, but I never had a company that built anything physical. So I had to figure out how to do all these things and bring together the right team of people. And so we did all that and then failed 3 times. It was tough going. Because the thing about a rocket is the passing grade is 100%. And you don't get to actually test the rocket in the real environment that it's going to be in. So I think the best analogy for rocket engineering is like if you want to create a really complicated bit of software, you can't run the software as an integrated whole, and you can't run it on the computer it's intended to run on. But the first time you put it all together and run it on that computer, it must run with no bugs. That's basically the essence of it. So we missed the mark there. The first launch, I was picking up bits of rocket near the launch site. It was a bit sad. But we learned with each successive flight, and we're able to, eventually with the 4th flight in 2008, reach orbit. And that was also with the last bit of money that we had. So thank goodness that happened. I think the saying is 4th time's the charm. So we got the Falcon 1 to orbit, and then began to scale that up to the Falcon 9, which is about an order of magnitude more thrust. It's around 1 million pounds of thrust. And we managed to get that to orbit, and then developed Dragon spacecraft, which recently was able to dock and return to Earth from the space station. That was a white knuckle event. It's a huge relief. Still can't quite believe it actually happened. But there's a lot more that must happen beyond this in order for humanity to become a spacefaring civilization, ultimately a multi-planet species. And that's something I think is vitally important, and I hope that some of you will participate in that, either at SpaceX or at other companies, because it's just really one of the most important things for the preservation and extension of consciousness. I mean, it's worth noting, as I'm sure people are aware, that the Earth has been around for 4 billion years, and civilization, at least in terms of having writing, has been around for 10,000 years, and that's being generous. So it's really it's sort of a tenuous existence that civilization and consciousness, as we know it, has been on Earth. And I think I'm actually fairly optimistic about the future of Earth. I don't want to sort of people to have the wrong impression that I think we're all about to die. I think things will most likely be okay for a long time on Earth. But not for sure, but most likely. But even if it's sort of 99% likely, a 1% chance, it's still worth spending a fair bit of effort to ensure that we have backed up the biosphere, planetary redundancy, if you will. So I think it's really quite important. And in order to do that, there's a breakthrough that needs to occur, which is to create a rapidly and completely reusable transport system to Mars, which is one of those things that's right on the borderline of impossible. That's sort of the thing that we're going to try to achieve there with SpaceX. And then on the Tesla front, the goal with Tesla was really to try to show what electric cars can do, because people had the wrong impression. We had to change people's perception of an electric vehicle, because they used to think of it as something that was slow and ugly and had low range, kind of like a golf cart. So that's why we created the Tesla Roadster, to show that you can be fast, attractive, and long range. And it's amazing how, even though you can show that something works on paper and the calculations are very clear, until you actually have the physical object and they can drive it, it doesn't really sink in for people. So that, I think, is something worth noting. If you're going to create a company, the first thing you should try to do is create a working prototype. Everything looks great on PowerPoint. You can make anything work on PowerPoint, but if you have an actual demonstration article, even if it's in primitive form, that's much, much more effective for convincing people. So after we made the Tesla Roadster, people said, oh, sure, we always knew you could make a car like that. It's an expensive car, and it's low volume, and it's small and all that, but you can make a real car. Like, okay, fine, I'm gonna make that too. But I think the overarching point I want to make is that you guys are the magicians of the 21st century. Don't let anything hold you back. Imagination is the limit, and go out there and create some magic. Thank you.
Pretty cool.
I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon.com. Literally billions of dollars of failures. It's easy to have ideas. It's very hard to turn an idea into a successful product. Do something you're very passionate about. And don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day.
He's best known as the founder, chairman, and CEO of Amazon.com. He's also the founder of Blue Origin, a human spaceflight company. He's currently listed as the third wealthiest person in the world with a net worth of $72.8 billion. He's Jeff Bezos, and here's my take on his top 10 rules for success, volume 2. Also, guys, as you're watching, if you hear something that really resonates with you, please leave it down in the comments below and put quotes around it so other people can be inspired. Also, when you write it down, it's much more likely to lock in for yourself as well. Enjoy.
My job, one of my jobs as the leader of Amazon, is to encourage people to be bold. And people love to focus on things that aren't yet working. And that's good. It's human nature. That kind of divine discontent can be very helpful. But you really, it's incredibly hard to get people to take bold bets. And you need to encourage that. And if you're going to take bold bets, they're going to be experiments. And if they're experiments, you don't know ahead of time whether they're going to work. Experiments are, by their very nature, prone to failure. But big successes, a few big successes, compensate for dozens and dozens of things that didn't work. So, bold bets, AWS, Kindle, Amazon Prime, our third-party seller business, all of those things are examples of bold bets that did work, and they pay for a lot of experiments. I've made billions of dollars of failures at Amazon.com, literally billions of dollars of failures. And, you might remember Pets.com or Cosmo, or give myself a root canal with no anesthesia very easily. None of those things are fun, but they don't matter. What really matters is companies that don't continue to experiment, companies that don't embrace failure. They eventually get in a desperate position where the only thing they can do is make a kind of Hail Mary bet at the very end of their corporate existence. Whereas companies that are, making bets all along, even, big bets, but not bet the company bets. I don't believe in bet the company bets. That's when you're desperate. That's the last thing you can do. We know from our past experiences that big things start small. The biggest oak starts from an acorn, and you've got to recognize, if you want to do anything new, you've got to be willing to let that acorn grow into a little sapling and then finally into a small tree. And maybe one day it'll be a big business on its own.
And in fact, that's one of the mottos for one of your initiatives. And forgive my pronunciation of Latin, but Gradatim ferocite. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means step by step ferociously. And it's the motto for Blue Origin. Basically, you can't skip steps. You have to put one foot in front of the other. Things take time. There are no shortcuts. And but you want to do those steps with passion and ferocity. I think probably our most important piece of intellectual property is our brand name. And I think people, and I think this is very important for anybody who's going to start a company or market an invention to understand, is that brands for companies are like reputations for people. And reputations are hard earned and easily lost. So the most important intellectual property that a company can have is, for us, it's Amazon. It's that name, but what it stands for. We've worked very hard to earn trust. You can't ask for trust. You just have to do it the hard way, one step at a time. You make a promise and then fulfill the promise. You say, we'll deliver this to you, tomorrow, and then you actually deliver it tomorrow. And if you do that over and over again, then ultimately you can instill your company's name with a reputation. And that's, I think, sometimes people talk about brands in this very amorphous way, but for me, I like to think of it as a person, and what is the reputation that person has, and how have they earned that reputation? I think stress, you can be, I think one of the things that's very important to note about stress is that stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over. So if I find that some particular thing is causing me to have stress, that's a warning flag for me. What it means is there's something that I haven't completely identified, perhaps in my conscious mind, that is bothering me, and I haven't yet taken any action on it. I find as soon as I identify it and make the first phone call or send off the first email message or whatever it is that we're going to do to start to address that situation, even if it's not solved, the mere fact that we're addressing it dramatically reduces any stress that might come from it. So stress comes from ignoring things that you shouldn't be ignoring. I think in large part. So stress doesn't come, people get stress wrong all the time, in my opinion. Stress doesn't come from hard work, for example. You can be working incredibly hard and loving it. And likewise, you can be out of work and incredibly stressed over that. So, and likewise, if you kind of use that as an analogy for what I was just talking about, if you're out of work, but you're going through, a disciplined approach of, a series of job interviews and so on and working to remedy that situation, you're going to be a lot less stressed than if you're just worrying about it and doing nothing. If you're giving great customer experience, the only way to do that is with happy people. You can't do it with a set of miserable people.
Our dream. The story starts. I was at a friend's house and she had on a shelf a copy of the DSM manual, which is the manual of mental disorders. It lists every known mental disorder. And it used to be back in the 50s, a pamphlet, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's 886 pages long, and it lists currently 374 mental disorders. So I was leafing through it, wondering if I had any mental disorders, and it turns out I've got 12. I've got generalized anxiety disorder, which is a given. I've got nightmare disorder, which is categorized if you have recurrent dreams of being pursued or declared a failure. And all my dreams involve people chasing me down the street going, "You're a failure." I've got parent-child relational problems, which I blame my parents for. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm kidding. And I've got malingering. And I think it's actually quite rare to have both malingering and generalized anxiety disorder, because malingering tends to make me feel very anxious. Anyway, I was looking through this book wondering if I was much crazier than I thought I was, or maybe it's not a good idea to diagnose yourself with a mental disorder if you're not a trained professional, or maybe the psychiatry profession has a kind of strange desire to label what's essentially normal human behavior as a mental disorder. I didn't know which of these things was true, but I thought it was kind of interesting, and I thought maybe I should meet a critic of psychiatry to get their view, which is how I ended up having lunch with the Scientologists. It was a man called Brian who runs a crack team of Scientologists who are determined to destroy psychiatry wherever it lies. They're called the CCHR. And I said to him, can you prove to me that psychiatry is a pseudoscience that can't be trusted? And he said, yes, we can prove it to you. And I said, how? And he said, we can introduce you to Tony. And I said, who's Tony? And he said, Tony's in Broadmoor. Now, Broadmoor is Broadmoor Hospital. It used to be known as the Broadmoor Asylum for the Criminally Insane. It's where they send the serial killers and the people who can't help themselves. And I said to Brian, well, what did Tony do? And he said, hardly anything. He beat someone up or something, and he decided to fake madness to get out of a prison sentence. But he faked it too well, and now he's stuck in Broadmoor and nobody will believe he's sane. Do you want us to try and get you into Broadmoor to meet Tony? So I said, yes, please. So I got the train to Broadmoor. I began to yawn uncontrollably around Kempton Park, which apparently is what dogs also do when anxious. They yawn uncontrollably. And we got to Broadmoor, and I got taken through gate after gate after gate after gate into the wellness centre, which is where you get to meet the patients. It looks like a giant Hampton Inn. It's all peach and pine and caramel colours, and the only bold colours are the reds of the panic buttons. And the patients started drifting in, and they were quite overweight and wearing sweatpants and quite docile looking. And Brian, the Scientologist, whispered to me, "They're medicated," which to the Scientologist is like the worst evil in the world, but I'm thinking it's probably a good idea. And then Brian said, "Here's Tony." And a man was walking in, and he wasn't overweight. He was in very good physical shape, and he wasn't wearing sweatpants. He was wearing a pinstripe suit, and he had his arm outstretched, like someone out of The Apprentice. He looked like a man who wanted to wear an outfit that would convince me that he was very sane. And he sat down, and I said, "So is it true that you faked your way in here?" And he said, yep, absolutely. I beat someone up when I was 17, and I was in prison awaiting trial, and my cellmate said to me, "You know what you have to do? Fake madness. Tell him you're mad, you'll get sent to some cushy hospital, nurses will bring you pizzas, you'll have your own PlayStation." So I said, "Well, how did you do it?" He said, "Well, I asked to see the prison psychiatrist, and I'd just seen a film called Crash, in which people get sexual pleasure from crashing cars into walls." So I said to the psychiatrist, "I get sexual pleasure from crashing cars into walls." And I said, "What else?" He said, "Oh yeah, I told the psychiatrist that I wanted to watch women as they died because it would make me feel more normal." And I said, "Where'd you get that from?" He said, "Oh, from a biography of Ted Bundy that they had at the prison library." Anyway, he faked madness too well, he said, and they didn't send him to some cushy hospital. They sent him to Broadmoor. And the minute he got there, he said he took one look at the place, asked to see the psychiatrist, said, "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm not mentally ill." I said, "How long have you been here for?" He said, "Well, if I'd just done my time in prison for the original crime, I'd have got 5 years. I've been in Broadmoor for 12 years. Tony said that it's a lot harder to convince people you're sane than it is to convince them you're crazy. He said, "I thought the best way to seem normal would be to talk to people normally about normal things like football and what's on TV. I subscribed to New Scientist, and recently they had an article about how the US Army was training bumblebees to sniff out explosives. So I said to a nurse, 'Did you know that the US Army's training bumblebees to sniff out explosives?' When I read my medical notes, I saw they'd written, 'Believes bees can sniff out explosives.'" He said, "They're always looking out for non-verbal clues to my mental state, but how do you sit in a sane way? How do you cross your legs in a sane way? It's just impossible." And when Tony said that to me, I thought to myself, am I sitting like a journalist? Am I crossing my legs like a journalist? He said, "I've got the Stockwell Strangler on one side of me, and I've got the Tiptoe Through the Tulips rapist on the other side of me. So I tend to stay in my room a lot because I find them quite frightening. And they take that as a sign of madness. They say it proves that I'm aloof and grandiose. So only in Broadmoor would not wanting to hang out with serial killers be a sign of madness." Anyway, he seemed completely normal to me, but what did I know? And when I got home, I emailed his clinician, Anthony Maiden. I said, "What's the story?" And he said, "Yep, we accept that Tony faked madness to get out of a prison sentence because his hallucinations that had seemed quite cliche to begin with just vanished the minute he got to Broadmoor. However, we've assessed him and we've determined that what he is a psychopath. And in fact, faking madness is exactly the kind of cunning and manipulative act of a psychopath. It's on the checklist, cunning manipulative. So faking your brain going wrong is evidence that your brain has gone wrong." And I spoke to other experts, and They said the pinstripe suit, classic psychopath, speaks to items 1 and 2 on the checklist, glibness, superficial charm, and grandiose sense of self-worth. And I said, well, I want to hang out with the other patients. Classic psychopath, it speaks to grandiosity and also lack of empathy. So all the things that had seemed most normal about Tony was evidence, according to his clinician, that he was mad in this new way. He was a psychopath. And his clinician said to me, if you want to know more about psychopaths, you can go on a psychopath spotting course run by Robert Hare, who invented the psychopath checklist. So I did. So I went on a psychopath spotting course, and I am now a certified, and I have to say extremely adept, psychopath spotter. So here's the statistics. 1 in 100 regular people is a psychopath. So there's 1,500 people in this room. 15 of you are psychopaths. Although that figure rises to 4% of CEOs and business leaders, so I think there's a very good chance there's about 30 or 40 psychopaths in this room. It could be carnage by the end of the night. Hare said the reason why is because capitalism at its most ruthless rewards psychopathic behaviour, the lack of empathy, the glibness, cunning, manipulative. In fact, capitalism, perhaps at its most remorseless, is a physical manifestation of psychopathy. It's like a form of psychopathy that's come down to affect us all. And Hare said to me, you know what, forget about some guy at Broadmoor who may or may not have fake madness. Who cares? That's not a big story. The big story, he said, is corporate psychopathy. You want to go and interview yourself some corporate psychopaths. So I gave it a try. I wrote to the Enron people. I said, can I come and interview you in prison to find out if you're psychopaths? They didn't reply. So I changed tack. I emailed Chainsaw Al Dunlap, the asset stripper from the 1990s. He would come into failing businesses and close down 30% of the workforce, just turn American towns into ghost towns. And I emailed him and I said, I believe you may have a very special brain anomaly that makes you special, interested in the predatory spirit and fearless. Can I come and interview you about your special brain anomaly? And he said, come on over. So I went to our Dunlap's grand Florida mansion. It was filled with sculptures of predatory animals. There were lions and tigers. He was taking me to the garden. There were falcons and eagles. He was saying to me over there, you've got sharks and more. He was saying this in a less effeminate way. You've got more sharks and you've got tigers. Was that Narnia? And then we went into his kitchen. Now, after that would be brought in to save failing companies, he'd closed down 30% of the workforce, and he quite often fired people with a joke. Like, for instance, one famous story about him, somebody came up to him and said, I've just bought myself a new car. And he said, well, you may have a new car, but I'll tell you what you don't have, a job. So in his kitchen, he was standing there with his wife, Judy, and his bodyguard, Sean. And I said, you know how I said in my email that you might have a special brain anomaly that makes you special? And he said, yeah, it's an amazing theory. It's like Star Trek. You're going where no man has gone before. And I said, well, some psychologists might say that this makes you... And he said, what? And I said, a psychopath. And I said, I've got a list of psychopathic traits in my pocket. Can I go through them with you? And he looked intrigued despite himself. And he said, okay, go on. And I said, okay, grandiose sense of self-worth, which I have to say would have been hard for him to deny because he was standing underneath a giant oil painting of himself. He said, well, you've got to believe in you. And I said, manipulative. He said, that's leadership. And I said, shallow affect and inability to experience a range of emotions. He said, who wants to be weighed down by some nonsense emotions? So we was going down the psychopath checklist, basically turning it into who moved my cheese. But I did notice something happening to me the day I was without Dunlap. Whenever he said anything to me that was kind of normal, like he said no to juvenile delinquency, he said he got accepted into West Point and they don't let delinquents in West Point. He said no to many short-term marital relationships. He's only ever been married twice. Admittedly, his first wife cited and had divorce papers that he once threatened her with a knife and said he always wondered what human flesh tasted like. But people say stupid things to each other in bad marriages in the heat of an argument, and his second marriage has lasted 41 years. So whenever he said anything to me that just seemed kind of non-psychopathic, I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to put that in the book. And then I realised that becoming a psychopath spotter had kind of turned me a little bit psychopathic. So I was desperate to shove him in a box marked psychopath. I was desperate to define him by his maddest edges, and I realised that.
Okay, 4 minutes. We'll do 4 more minutes because this thing has about 4 minutes left.
Oh my God, this is what I've been doing for 20 years. It's what all journalists do. We travel across the world with our notepads in our hands and we wait for the gems. And the gems are always the outermost aspects of our interviewee's personality. And we stitch them together like medieval monks and we leave the normal stuff on the floor. And this is a country that overdiagnoses certain mental disorders hugely. Childhood bipolar, children as young as 4 are being labelled bipolar because they have temper tantrums, which scores them high on their bipolar checklist. When I got back to London, Tony phoned me. He said, why haven't you been returning my calls? I said, well, they said that you're a psychopath. And he said, I'm not a psychopath. He said, you know what? One of the items on the checklist is lack of remorse. But another item on the checklist is cunning manipulative. So when you say you feel remorse for your crime, they say, typical of the psychopath, to cunningly say he feels remorse when he doesn't. It's like witchcraft. They turn everything upside down. He said, I've got a tribunal coming up. Will you come to it? So I said, okay. So I went to his tribunal. And after 14 years in Broadmoor, they let him go. They decided that he shouldn't be held indefinitely because he scores high on a checklist that might mean that he would has a greater than average chance of recidivism. So they let him go. And outside in the corridor, he said to me, you know what, John? Everyone's a bit psychopathic. He said, you are, I am. Well, obviously I am. I said, what are you going to do now? He said, I'm going to go to Belgium because there's a woman there that I fancy, but she's married, so I'm going to have to get a split up from my husband. Anyway, that was 2 years ago, and that's when my book ended. And for the last 20 months, everything was fine. Nothing bad happened. He was living with a girl outside London. He was, according to Brian the Scientologist, making up for lost time, which I know sounds ominous, but isn't necessarily ominous. Unfortunately, after 20 months, he did go back to jail for a month. He got into a fracas in a bar, he called it. Ended up going to jail for a month, which I know is bad, but at least a month implies that it's whatever the fracas wasn't too bad. And then he phoned me. And you know what? I think it's right that Tony is out. Because you shouldn't define people by their maddest edges. And what Tony is he's a semi-psychopath. He's a grey area in a world that doesn't like grey areas. But the grey areas are where you find the complexity. It's where you find the humanity. And it's where you find the truth. And Tony said to me, John, can I buy you a drink in a bar? I just want to thank you for everything you've done for me. And I didn't go. What would you have done?
Neat. Seeing a lot of flecks of metal on this guy. Okay. Well, we're going to call it a day there. Or at least tonight. At least for now. Got all the metals done on the intercessors. Or the, I don't know what these guys are. Whatever they are. And we have a little bit more to do on those guys tomorrow. Not bad.